The season 3 premiere of From has finally arrived, and it's safe to say they didn't get off to a slow start.
You were lying unconscious on the side of a trail.
After last season's finale, we've all been sitting on a ton of questions, and this episode did go some of the way to answering them. However, in true From fashion, it's left us with a ton more. And now it's time to break it all down.
What?
Your child, the one you lost, what was his name?
They truly nailed the season 3 opener by giving us everything we liked from the first two, but somehow they've made it even more brutal. Before we jump in, remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to catch more. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into From Season 3, Episode 1.
You said St. Anthony's Hospital, but where is this?
You're in Camden, Maine. Can you tell me your name?
Season 3 picks up right where we left off previously, with Tabitha waking up in St. Anthony's Hospital in Camden, Maine. She's a little cut and bruised, but overall in pretty good health. I mean, considering she was just pushed from the top of a lighthouse. Anyways, the nurse taking care of her asks a few questions, which Tabitha doesn't answer. She's pretty wise here, as revealing the truth would have had them testing for some kind of head injury and would almost certainly raise their suspicions about her overall mental well-being. Saying that, they did want to run some tests on her, which I think would be pretty interesting if they managed to do so, just to see if spending the amount of time she did in the town resulted in any abnormalities she needs to be concerned about. However, once she heard the police were on their way to question
Oh, why?
It's just a formality.
her, she didn't waste any time in getting out of there. Now, after leaving the hospital, which I have to say, she was pretty calm about, considering where she's just been for who knows how long, the last thing I'd want to do is get into an elevator with a bunch of strangers. So she's walking down the street, she spots the boy in white standing across the road. Whatever he is, a ghost or an hallucination she's having, he's not actually there. There's no shadow of him on the ground, whereas all the people walking past him, they have shadows. Now let's go down the avenue with it actually being the boy disappearing to her here rather than it being her imagination. To me, it doesn't look like he's trying to direct her in any way, but rather he's acknowledging she's out and he's saying goodbye. With some of the stuff that plays out in the episode, I actually think there's a strong chance the lighthouse, this boy, and where she is right now in Maine, isn't actually the outside world at all. I think he's actually guided her deeper into the mystery, only being portrayed as being on their side, and this version of Camden in Maine is all part of it. Let's not forget the people in the town came from all around, they weren't all travelling on the same road when this happened, yet the lighthouse brought her to the very town where Victor lived and where his father still resides. It's all a bit too convenient and a bit fishy if you ask me. Anyways, we catch up with Boyd treating his wound from season 2 whilst talking to Father Catry, and it's one of those ones, when said out loud, you really do see just how far worse things have gotten in such a short space of time, with one of Boyd's own trying to shoot him, the town are in a constant state of fear, terrified to sleep, as after all, that's when some of the recent victims have been claimed in their sleep, and on top of all of that, winter's come in, and as Victor once said,
things change. Here it's usually bad.
oh, and of course they're running low on food after the storm wiped out half of their crops. Whilst the scene would come across here as being innocent from the outside, Father Catry's actually dead, let's not forget, so this is rather a harrowing reminder of Boyd's own mental state. Being the town sheriff, he's the one the townspeople look to for guidance. He's very much their leader, so if something were to happen to him, then his deputy Kenny would need to step up. But the jury's still out there on whether he's ready, especially with what's coming for him around the corner, which we'll get onto later. Anyways, outside, Jim's planning to leave in order to find Tabitha after his son Ethan temporarily becomes lost looking for her out in the woods. Luckily seen by Ethan's mum, he's brought back, but it becomes clear to Jim he has to go for the kids' sake. He can't leave their mother out in the woods to fend for herself alone. Strangely enough, though, let's not forget Victor helped her on the way, so he knows roughly where she's gone, yet he chooses not to say anything to Jim. I'm also wondering if Tabitha's body will be found at the bottom of the lighthouse, if they ever go that far, or if she's kind of just vanished. Now, Boyd thinks Tabitha's dead and urges Jim to stay with the kids, but he's not having any of it.
You know as well as I do that the odds are she's already...
Deciding to take a talisman for a tent, Jim tells him of a cabin where he stayed with Sarah before so he can take refuge in there come nightfall. Now, to frustrate Boyd even further, Kenny overheard and decides to go along with Jim, as he doesn't want the kids to lose both of their parents in 1 week. Reluctantly agreeing, Boyd gives them the lowdown on everything he knows from his time in the forest, telling them if they see spiderwebs, they're heading in the right direction. Now, My thoughts can't help but go out to Kenny. He wants to go with Jim so his children have more of a chance of growing up with at least one parent, which foreshadows something we'll get into later. But I will just say, Kenny's literally the definition of a nice guy who always finishes last, and I think this season we'll see a lot play out with him, which will definitely leave him worse for wear going forwards. Now, as well as the storm wiping out pretty much half of the crops, which meant they needed to ration and save the small amount that remained, it turns out the ground's actually being poisoned too. I know what you're thinking, it can't get much worse for these guys, but anyway, it causes the remaining crops to go bad, leaving them with only the livestock left, which they can either A, keep and use for milk and eggs, but even then there wouldn't be enough to go around, but it's better than nothing. Or B, they could kill the goats, the cows and the chickens and live off the meat, hoping it lasts long enough until they've managed to grow some new crops again in a different area. And of course, winter's coming for the first time in a long time, so they're really against the clock with that one. And all of this was actually discussed with Ethan over here in too. Now, he's formed an attachment to one of the ghosts, so was pretty upset when he heard them talking about slaughter. Fair play to the lad though, he did understand the situation and asks Boyd to kill that one first, if it comes to it.
Since you'll have to watch your friends die.
Which, it is pretty sad for a kid to say, but it also foreshadows what's to come with Boyd come the end of the episode too. So whatever this thing is that's keeping them there, it's really beginning to up the ante and tighten their grip on the townspeople as we move deeper into season 3. Not only are they afraid to sleep, leading to sleep deprivation, if they wasn't already afraid of the monsters, they now also face the reality of not being able to eat, potentially leading themselves to starvation. But before then, we'll see tensions rise within the community between one another. Everything that's kept the town survivable up until this point is now slowly being taken away. We actually see a bit of this play out in the episode too, when the townspeople barge past Ethan's mum into the diner searching for the food supplies kept there, as from right now that's the only food available in the town, well, other than the animals. And to be fair, we did see someone trying to steal a goat, so things are really starting to heat up in that department. So yeah, if you're one of them people out there that believe this is some kind of government or extraterrestrial experiment, it's really hard to disagree when it all seems as calculated as it is right now. Anyways, back in the real world, if we can really call it that, Tabitha manages to borrow a phone, making a phone call to her mum.
Mum?
Tabby! Oh God, Tabby, where are you?
It's a bit of a tearjerker as her mum's pleading with her not to hang up the phone, and the mum obviously wants to trace to find her location. Now, we're not sure how much time has actually passed in the real world since they disappeared. It doesn't seem like a short amount of time, like a few hours or a few days, but it just seems longer to them on the inside. But it could match up the same as the amount of time they've actually spent in town. Of course, we can't be sure on that just yet though, so we'll keep our eyes peeled for any clues on that one. Now, after hanging up the phone, it seems everything is really being laid out in front of Tabitha here, as she pretty much looks up to find a church, where she goes for a confession, needing to talk to somebody about what she's been through, losing her baby, and where she's just come from, but changes her mind after feeling like the priest thinks she's a little bit crazy. However, he then follows her out of the booth and asks what his name was, meaning the baby she lost, which is an immediate red flag that not everything is as it seems here, because she never told the priest the baby she lost was a boy, she just called him the baby. Anyways, this catches her attention and prevents her from leaving for a moment, before he then conveniently points her into the next direction, being inside the lunchbox, which has Victor's old address stuck inside, which, as I mentioned earlier, just so happens to be in the same town that she ended up in. Now, this is where Tabitha arrives at Victor's old address, as a car pulls up outside that turns out to be his father.
You're his father.
Who immediately recognises Victor's lunchbox that she's holding, asking where she got it. As I said earlier, it's hard to say for sure what's really going on here, but I have a feeling this isn't the real world she's in, but rather she's ventured deeper into the mystery, or if it's all an experiment, then she's progressed up a level. I don't think these people she's meeting, like the priest, like the father, are actually real people. Now, back with Jim and Kenny on the search for Tabitha, we're not sure if they've taken a wrong turn, simply haven't come far enough yet, or the layout of the forest is continuously shifting, which sounds pretty crazy, but this is a place that loops back on itself when you try and drive away. So at this stage, pretty much take your pick. Now, we know they haven't seen the spiderwebs, instead they've come across pretty dodgy looking scarecrows, except they look to be made out of bones, however, not human bones. And we see an old settlement just behind them too, with buildings likely hundreds of years old. I think what they found here is another town just like their own, except this one existed long before. And since then, the inhabitants of that town have all been killed off, likely through another massacre, and the skeleton scarecrow things put on display was this town's attempt to keep them safe, with the remains being that of the monsters. We see farmers do something similar on their fields when they keep birds away with scarecrows, and if we take it right back, pirates executed often were strung up around execution docks to serve as warnings to other pirates. And I think the people that belonged to this old town likely did something similar. So I guess we could really call it their version of the talisman. How good it was, we'll find out. Anyways, they decide to stay in one of the huts there for the night, continuing their search in the morning. They did have a close call with something lurking around outside, which didn't sound like a usual culprit, so we could be onto something new entirely here, but ultimately, for now at least, it's amounted to nothing. Now, whilst resting up for the night, Jim comes to the realization that the reason Tabitha left on her own was so the kids would still have someone there, which results in him deciding to abandon the search and return back to the town in the morning. But whilst all this is happening, all hell's breaking loose back with the others. You see, the monsters are releasing the cattle from their pens. The last hope of survival for the community is their livestock. This was clearly done to lure the townspeople out from the safety of their houses. And of course it worked when Boyd spotted a cow walking past his window, and along with Victor, Ethan's mum and Jay tried to get as many as they could back inside, but by doing so walked right into a trap. The smaller animals went into the houses, whilst the larger animals, like the cows, had to go back in the barn, likely because they wouldn't fit through the doors. It all seems like all of a sudden the dark forces to be have dialed things up to 11 with this one, and I think that could actually be down to the town itself doing relatively well of late. They've had a few hiccups here or there, but overall they've been pretty solid. But it could also be down to certain individuals like Jim, Tabitha, Boyd, and a few more digging a bit deeper into the weeds, searching for answers rather than just sitting around accepting that this was their new reality. Big shout out to our guy Victor as well, by the way, for jumping into action lightning speed when the cattle were released, especially after his struggles in the cave with Tabitha. The fact Victor has survived here since he was a small boy at times on his own is mind-blowing. It kind of makes you wonder if they've purposely kept him alive, if they're also feeding on emotions, which is another theory I've got. Then I'd need at least one person around to do that. Now, Ethan's mum is helping Boyd with getting the cows back into the barn, unknowingly triggering part 2 of the monster's trap. And this is the thing, right? These creatures aren't just your mindless zombies walking around at night looking to eat you. They're clearly sophisticated to some degree. We've already seen their ability to seduce someone across multiple nights before, and once they catch you, they don't always kill you. Sometimes they want you to suffer, like the girl who was staked to a tree last season. It's almost like they not only feed on you, but also your fear. Now, this is exactly what happens with Boyd and Ethan's mum, is once they get back to the barn, close the doors and put the talisman up, they hear a voice from the back of the barn. The same voice, by the way, that came through on the radio in season 2. As a group of monsters appear from the shadows, they grab Boyd, clawing his arm, whilst also using his own handcuffs that he dropped to handcuff him to a pole. They're not going to kill him, but rather they want to break him. They want him to suffer by watching Ethan's mum be ripped apart. At this point, I am so invested in what's behind the monsters changing up tactics this time around. They seem much more calculated in their actions, especially with the multiple part trap they've sprung at the end there by getting the townspeople into the street to save their livestock, whilst also anticipating they'd be then brought back to the barns so some of them would wait in there. It seems the theme of this season so far is desperation. Everything's seeming a bit desperate at the moment. Food is dwindling, many can't sleep, and now another key figure seems to have been killed. I can only imagine how Kenny's going to react once he returns, but what they're also doing with all of this is creating friction within the group itself, which will also leave them extremely vulnerable if they end up not having each other's backs. Overall, I really enjoyed this week's episode. I can't wait for the next one, but I want to know, do you think Tabitha's really on the outside, or is it just another part of the mystery she's uncovering alone? Make sure to drop your thoughts, theories, and wilder speculations down in the comments below. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you've enjoyed it, and remember to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to catch more. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.